this video, we'll talk about many common misconceptions about early retirement that you may have heard from family and friends. Early retirement is part of the FIRE movement, short for financial independence / retiring early. And the first rule about FIRE Club? Don't talk about FIRE Club.
The first rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club.
No, but seriously, anything to do with money is usually a topic I try to avoid in normal conversations, especially with people who don't have my general enthusiasm for personal finance. If you're talking to someone in their 50s who's still living paycheck to paycheck despite making good income because they spend all of their money on fancy houses, cars, boats, and vacations, if you tell them that you want to retire at age 35, they'll probably scoff at you. To them, their lifestyle is just the norm, and they could not imagine saving 30% of their income or more for retirement because they need all of their material things in order to be happy. And even if they do agree that they can cut back their expenses, they can't turn back time. If they're in their 50s, they made decisions 30 years ago that did not lead to early retirement. I mean, it's natural human behavior, right? Seeing you work towards early retirement makes them think that if they had made different decisions at your age, they could be retired by now. So rather than face that fact, sometimes people will get defensive and instead question the validity of the FIRE movement by spouting these misconceptions. Of course, this does not apply to everyone. I'm talking specifically about older people who have made good incomes throughout their career, but chose not to pursue financial independence or early retirement, either because they didn't know about it or they didn't want to make the sacrifices required to make it happen. The ability to retire early is unfortunately a privilege only some people have access to, but not everybody who has access to it uses it. Because yes, while I absolutely believe that everyone should work towards financial independence if they're able to, I do recognize that there are sacrifices required to make that happen. So without wasting any time, let's debunk the first early retirement myth. Myth number 1, if you earn a single penny during your retirement that's not from your investments, you're not really retired. I can absolutely understand how this misconception came about because the traditional view of retirement is retirees lazing around on a beach or playing bridge all day. But the whole idea of early retirement is your sense of freedom. You can go anywhere, do anything. I mean, within reason, of course, you can't just start murdering people. But the point is, your life is what you want to make of it when you're retired. Now, if you go back working full-time doing something similar to what you did before you retired, I don't know if I'd really call you retired. On the other hand, if you take a job at your local library because you love books and you want something a little bit more structured in your week, I would still call you retired because your primary motivation isn't to build wealth or increase your income. There's a lot of gray area here, but I think people are a little bit too quick to jump down early retirees' throats for not being really retired just because they have a blog that they update once in a while. In a similar vein though, I will say that there are a lot of personal finance gurus out there who center their entire brand around being retired, but in reality, they spend probably 50 plus hours a week creating content like their courses, their ebooks, and their videos. Like most gurus, if they don't practice what they preach, I stay far away. Remember that these people have a financial incentive to get you to think that they're retired when they're in fact not. It's really the same for all types of gurus out there. I mean, if a house flipping guru spends most of their time talking at conventions and pushing their courses, it really doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to realize that there's something fishy going on there. And if you guys are enjoying this video, be sure to give it a like for the YouTube algorithm. I make videos every week on all sorts of personal finance, early retirement, and financial independence topics, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Myth number 2. Saving for early retirement means sacrificing your happiness in your 20s and 30s. This misconception, I think, is the main reason why young people put off saving for retirement. There's always something better, something more immediate to save for. But you can't fairly judge what saving for early retirement would look like for you if you don't actually run the numbers. My last video was actually on how to go from broke to retired in just 15 years, so if you're new to the idea of FIRE, you can take a look at that video, which I'll link up here, if you want to get an idea of what the numbers look like kind of as a baseline. How much you need to save right now will depend on how much you're currently saving, how soon you want to retire, how expensive your lifestyle will be during retirement, and many other factors. I don't make 6 figures, or even close to it really, but I'm actually very happy with my lifestyle because I made the conscious decision to avoid lifestyle inflation as much as possible in my early 20s. I've talked about lifestyle inflation in my previous videos, but it's basically the concept of your expenses increasing at the same rate as your income. I established a lifestyle that I know I'll be happy with for at least the next 10 years or so. I rent a nice but not excessively large apartment. I regularly go out with my friends, or at least, before COVID was a thing. I only recently bought a used car that will suit all of my needs for the next 10 to 15 years. And I live in a mountain town, so I ski 30 to 40 times a season. even though it's a pretty expensive hobby. I'm able to have this lifestyle despite saving aggressively for retirement because I prioritize the things that make me happy and I don't spend money on the things that don't. For example, I'm not a huge foodie. I love cooking and I do it pretty much every day, but I realize that I don't really enjoy going out to eat all that much. The cost per meal just wasn't bringing me the amount of happiness that I thought it was worth it. So instead I just reserve it for very special occasions and I'm perfectly content. And keep in mind too that the things that you prioritize might be different than what your friends and family prioritize. And that's perfectly okay. Don't feel pressured to spend money on things just because that's what everyone else is doing. Because I established this happy, comfortable lifestyle early on, a lifestyle that still allows me to reach all of my financial goals, I know I'll be very content with this level of spending for a long time. So every time I get a raise or a promotion, all of that extra money just goes straight to my investments. So this misconception that saving for early retirement will just make you miserable in your 20s and 30s is absolutely not the case. There's a middle ground between spending everything you earn and living in a 2-bedroom apartment with 7 other people surviving on ramen. You just have to find it. Myth number 3. The 4% rule is based off of historical market trends and not realistic for the future. You'll probably run out of money. So for those of you who are new to the FIRE movement, the concept of retiring early is based on a 1998 Trinity paper where they studied historical market trends and inflation rates over the previous decades to determine the safe withdrawal rate for a portfolio. This is the percentage of an investment portfolio that you can withdraw on an annual basis to have a reasonable amount of confidence that that portfolio will not be depleted within 30 years. And the rate that they found during the study is 4%, sometimes called the 4% rule. So yes, the 4% rule is based on historical market trends, and every investment material out there will have some sort of disclaimer saying past performance is not indicative of future returns, which is absolutely true. I mean, ideally we'd have a magic ball that we can use to look into the future to see how the stock market will perform so you can make your investment decisions with zero risk. But if you had access to something like that, just wait for the next $1 billion lottery jackpot and choose the winning numbers. I mean, like, what are you even doing wasting your time in the stock market when you can turn $1 into $1 billion? The point is, historical market trends are the best thing that we have, so we might as well use them. They absolutely don't predict the future, but there's also no reason to believe that the future stock market is going to perform vastly differently than it did in the last 50 years. And there are absolutely ways to minimize this risk. You could choose a lower withdrawal rate, like 3% or 3.5%. You could work an extra couple years to pad your portfolio beyond what you really need. And you can be open to going back to work part-time during retirement if you need to for a couple years if your expenses go up more than you expected. Myth number 4. You'll lose all purpose in life and be bored out of your mind. Now, I'm obviously not retired yet, but I have consumed a lot of FIRE-related content through different online forums and YouTube channels and small documentaries, and I found that pretty much anybody can have a fulfilling life in retirement, although some people may achieve that in different ways. I mean, ask yourself this question: what is it that you're truly passionate about in life? Is it what you do currently for work? If so, that's awesome, that's amazing, but I would imagine that very few people would say yes to that question. For most people, working is just a means to an end. Our society heavily emphasizes what you do for work as a huge part of your identity, and detaching from that can be really difficult sometimes. This is especially true if you work in a really demanding industry where you work 60 to 70 hour weeks because you just don't have time to do anything else. It's hard to develop and pursue your own passions outside of work if you only have a few hours of free time each week, especially if your job is really mentally taxing. Retiring early forces you to redefine a huge part of your identity, but you can use that as a great opportunity if you do it wisely. Retirement gives you time, and time gives you energy and mental clarity. If you don't know what you're really passionate about, you can explore a bunch of different options at your own pace. Some early retirees get really involved in volunteer organizations, and this doesn't have to just be picking up trash or sorting cans at your local food bank. If there's a cause that you strongly believe in, like education or climate change, I guarantee there's probably an organization in your local area that's doing something about it. And if there isn't, you can always make one. Other retirees enjoy learning new skills, like an instrument or a foreign language. Some people say that adults have a harder time picking this stuff up, but I think part of the reason people say this is because adults just have way less free time. Early retirees don't have this problem. Traveling is also something that's much easier to do in retirement, especially if you're young and in good health. In the US, employers typically only give about 2 weeks of vacation per year, which is so low. Many people have family commitments like visiting in-laws or attending weddings or funerals, which can really cut into that precious vacation time. So there's very little time left over to actually see the world. And if you retire early, you very likely have the time, money, and health to travel the world as much as you want. If you're truly unhappy during early retirement, there's nothing wrong with seeing a mental health professional, because sometimes these issues might be deeper than just not working. And if all else fails, nothing is stopping you from going back to work. Myth number 5. You'll finally be happy and all of your problems will be solved. Similar to the last misconception, you shouldn't expect to automatically feel happy and fulfilled during retirement just because you quit your job. Work is such a huge part of our lives, and many times it can be a distraction to other things going on that bring you negative feelings. It's really important to understand the difference between being unhappy with working for a living and being unhappy with your life. If you fall into the latter category, you'll definitely want to address this long before early retirement through therapy or whatever method works for you. If you're feeling unhappy with your life and then you retire, that feeling will probably only compound because work was acting as a distraction. In some ways, retirement amplifies your mental state. If you enjoy pursuing your passions before retirement, you'll be even happier and more fulfilled during retirement because you'll have more time to do the things that you love. Conversely, if you're unhappy and unfulfilled before retirement, retiring might only make those issues worse because work was acting as a distraction to keep those thoughts away. So really, retirement is what you make of it, and you shouldn't expect to feel happy or bored or unfulfilled just because you're no longer working. Myth number 6, you'll have no money left over to pass on to your children. The first thing that I want to say about this misconception is, even if it were true, I don't think it's such a bad thing. I completely understand wanting to give your children a head start in life with a huge inheritance, but from what I've observed, it can sometimes backfire. Like it or not, money motivates people, and it can be hard to want to make something of your life if you know that you have a hefty inheritance coming when you turn 40. I'm absolutely in favor of financial and social safety nets. I think they allow people to take risks that they otherwise would not have been able to make. But I think there really should be a balance here. Growing up in a well-off family already puts you at such a head start, even without an inheritance. You'll get access to private schools, personal tutors, fancy colleges, and whatever professional connections that your family undoubtedly has when you eventually need to enter the workforce. So choosing not to retire early just because you want to give your kids a large inheritance is not only pointless because they already have such a head start in life, it can sometimes backfire and do the opposite of what you intended. But more importantly, it's just not true. When you choose to pursue early retirement, you can work towards that goal in a way that minimizes the risk of that portfolio depleting by choosing a lower withdrawal rate or increasing the size of your portfolio. Ideally, your withdrawals are small enough that they don't outpace the gains of that portfolio. So essentially, you're drawing upon the gains or the interest without ever really touching the principal. That way, when you ultimately pass on your assets to your children, they'll still get a huge chunk of money. Yes, it probably won't be as much money as if you had worked a long 45-year career, but assuming that you didn't raise a cold, heartless sociopath, I'm guessing your children will probably say they'd rather have more time with you than more money. And what better way to spend quality time with your children growing up than retiring early? Myth number 7, only people making a 6-figure income can retire early. So I actually did a whole video about how a person making less than $100,000 a year can go from broke to retired in just 15 years. And that's without living like a broke college student. I think the calculations that I used assumed about $3,000 a month for expenses, which is pretty comfortable in most places. I'll link the video up here if you guys want to check it out. But from the calculations that I made, you only need about $80,000 of pre-tax income in order to retire in 15 years. $80,000 per year is still a lot. It's definitely higher than the national average, but I think it's less than people expect. And if you consider that many people are in marriages where both spouses work, it's even more achievable than you think. Both spouses could be making $40,000 per year each for a combined total of $80,000. Now, obviously, your own situation will depend a lot on where you're located, whether you have a working spouse, how much your lifestyle costs, whether you have kids, and a bunch of other factors. And keep in mind too, 15 years is very quick for early retirement. A normal career is roughly 45 years. So even if you retire in 30 years, you're still getting back 15 years of your life. But it's entirely possible to retire early without ever making 6 figures. You definitely need to be making more than minimum wage, but early retirement is absolutely doable on a middle-class income. Myth number 8, you can't withdraw money from your retirement accounts before age 59 and a half. So So on the surface, this statement is true. You can't withdraw money from your retirement accounts like your 401ks and your IRAs before age 59 and a half without paying a 10% penalty, which can be a huge cut into your gains and make it extremely difficult to retire early. However, there is a completely legal IRS-approved loophole that will allow you to withdraw money early without paying any sort of penalty. And that's something called the Roth IRA conversion ladder. As a reminder, Roth IRAs are individual retirement accounts where the contributions are taxed like normal, but the distributions from the account are completely tax-free. One special provision that makes Roth IRAs so unique and crucial to early retirement is that at any point, regardless of your age, you can withdraw your contributions without any penalty. So let's say you contribute $1,000 to your Roth IRA and it eventually grows to $1,500. A little while later, your car breaks down and you need some emergency money. Well, you can withdraw the $1,000 that you initially contributed without paying any sort of penalty, regardless of your age. If you tried to pull out that extra $500 that you gained, however, you would be hit with a 10% penalty. So that's great. You can withdraw all of your contributions to your Roth IRA to use during early retirement without paying any penalty. But Roth IRA contributions are capped at $6,000 per year, which is really not a whole lot. And if you're retiring early, you're probably not going to be working a super long career. So the sum of all of your contributions to your Roth IRA will probably not be enough to cover your living expenses. This is where the Roth IRA conversion ladder comes into the picture. If you move money from your 401k to your Roth IRA, which you can completely do, many people do it when they change employers, all of that money is counted as a contribution to your Roth IRA. Luckily though, conversions like that do not count towards the $6,000 per year cap, so you can move as much money as you want. And that money is treated as a contribution and not a gain. So because of the Roth IRA special provision, you can withdraw all of that money completely penalty-free. The IRS recognizes that people do this though, and so to make it a little bit more difficult, they've enacted a 5-year waiting period on money that's converted from a different retirement account to a Roth IRA. This means that if you move $50,000 from your 401k to your Roth IRA, you'll have to wait 5 years before being able to withdraw it without penalty. So it definitely takes some forward thinking. You'll need to have a rough idea about how much you'll be spending 5 years ahead, but it's absolutely doable with some organization. Early retirees also tend to have larger cash reserves than working people, sometimes even 1 or 2 years worth of expenses, so you're covered in case you underestimate your expenses 1 year. It's also important to remember that money contributed to a traditional retirement account is subject to being taxed when it's withdrawn. Because you're converting money from traditional to Roth, it'll be taxed in the year that you actually move that money, so 5 years before you end up withdrawing it for your living expenses. But since it's now considered Roth money, it's not taxed when you eventually withdraw it, so you're not risking double taxation. Roth IRA conversion ladders can be fairly complex depending on your financial situation, and I'm absolutely not a tax professional, so please do your own research here. But I hope you guys kind of understand now how you can withdraw money from your retirement accounts long before you reach the traditional retirement age. And if you guys want to see a video going into more detail about how these ladders work, be sure to let me know in the comments below. So there you have it, 8 common early retirement myths that really aren't true. I hope you guys have a better understanding of the realities of retiring early. And if you learned something from this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm. I make videos just like this one on all sorts of personal finance topics every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on bell notifications so that you don't miss out. And be sure to follow me on Instagram at AlexRayFinance for extra content. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all next week.